And over to you, Chris. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Damien, and to the organisers of tonight, and to all of you for coming out. And thanks, actually, for the tremendous support that yourselves and many, many others in the movement have shown towards me, towards Ben, towards the others who were arrested on the 18th of January, and other arrestees. It really does make a massive difference. And thanks in particular to apparently the many hundreds of people who phoned Walworth Road Police Station on Saturday evening and asked to speak to me, because it caused some consternation in the police station, including the guy that took my fingerprints, who actually said to me, he whispered in my ear, "You've got so much support, who the fuck are you?" Pablo Escobar. But no, seriously, it's part of the kind of, what is one of the essential qualities of this unprecedented movement for Palestine, that in the face of demonisation, in the face of criminalisation, in the face of all these arrests, people have carried on coming week after week, month after month. And I do seriously want to pay respect really to each and every one of you for the incredible commitment, the incredible staying power, and the incredible courage that you've all shown over the last 16 months. It's obviously been tremendously important. Imagine a situation where this genocide was taking place and there hadn't been this street movement, there hadn't been these protests, there hadn't been this tremendous organisation, protests, pickets and so forth up and down the country. It's clearly made a huge amount of difference. But we should be clear that what happened on the 18th of January was a serious escalation in the attacks on the movement. It was a real and serious assault on the freedom of assembly in this country. They arrested 77 people, they violently arrested me, they charged Ben Jamal the next day, and then called in Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell into a police station for what was an entirely peaceful protest. And this is actually unprecedented, and it is very, very serious. And we need to make sure that this attack doesn't stand, that actually it is resisted, and that ultimately we do win. And the cases are important, and they're not important personally, particularly. We don't, compared to what the Palestinians face, what we're facing is really not that intimidating. But in terms of the outcome, in terms of the impact that the judgments will make, it does matter, because it will shape the way that policing it develops, not just for the Palestine movement, but for the wider movements that Damien and others have talked about. And we are defending every single one of those unjustly arrested on the 18th of January. But when we do so, we should be clear that there is absolutely no way that these events could have taken place without the say-so of the Home Secretary and of the Prime Minister. And that gives you some sense of how serious and grave the situation is. And in the upside-down world of the British establishment, those of us who are protesting against the flattening of hospitals, the incineration of refugee camps, the destruction of whole communities, are actually called hate marches by people who support a genocide. And really nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, the direct opposite is the truth. This is about Palestine, but it's not about particular identities. Our protests bring together those people in society from all backgrounds, including the Jewish background, who are most appalled, who are most outraged by the merciless attack on an innocent people, by oppression that is taking place thousands of miles away. And as such, we have to be clear that our protests represent the very best, the very finest of humanity. And I don't think we should buy for a moment the idea that does circulate sometimes, even actually on the left, a product of frustration, obviously, that our demonstrations don't make a difference. I think if they didn't make a difference, then how do you explain the attacks? How do you explain the constant harassment that we've suffered, the exceptional use of control orders, the exceptional use of powers of arrest, the demonisation in public by senior politicians from the cabinet, both amongst the Tories and Labour, criminalising the movement, demonising, trying to marginalise the movement. This is a sign that they're fearful of us, they're frightened of us, they're worried about the impact that the movement has. And let's be clear, the movement has made an impact, and this is something that isn't reflected. The movement itself is barely reported, and certainly the impact it hasn't been reported. But we are in a situation now where militarily the Israelis have had some success. They've caused absolute devastation, they've caused absolute misery and carnage, but politically they have been defeated. Israel is isolated on the world stage. Israel is a pariah state on the world stage, and this wouldn't be the case if it hadn't been for this movement that is taking place around the world. Now, the attacks are a threat not just to the Palestine movement, but to the wider social movements, to trade unionists, to people protesting against racism, protesting against austerity, to anyone actually who dissents from the direction our rulers want to take society. And we do need to oppose the attacks, and we do need, I believe, to make January the 18th a cause célèbre, actually, because one of the things that my lawyer, Gareth Pearce, says, and I think it's probably relatively accepted on the left, is that court cases are won half in the courtroom and half outside the courtroom. And because we're not going to get immediate media coverage, and because their strategy is going to be to limit the amount of time myself and Ben and other people get in court in order to put a political case, one of the things we need to do is to popularise our story, popularise our narrative, popularise what actually happened on the day, as opposed to the kind of things that they are saying about it. So these meetings are crucial. We're having these meetings across the country, which is fantastic, but please think about raising the issue of the right to protest and what happened on January the 18th in your union branch, in your community, in your university, in your school, wherever it is. We need to spend the next months getting the word out about what really happened on the day, and that is very critical. But I also want to ask the question, why exactly did it happen? Why exactly did the police attack us at the time that they have done? And I think, there's a whole number of things you could say about this, but I think there's two general reasons. One is this is part, as other speakers have said, of an ongoing and accelerating attempt to clamp down on the right of protest that you can date back, a decade or more, to a whole series of bits of legislation that have been brought in to make it harder to organise protests, to put obstacles on our way, to make it easier for the police to demonise and to attack protesters. And I guess this is part of a general trend in society where there's anxiety in ruling circles about the fact that they feel there's more and more bitterness against them, that they feel that whole populations are getting cynical and angry at the way they're being treated, and so they respond by moving more and more in authoritarian directions. But I also think there is a specific problem about Palestine from the point of view of our establishment, which is that they're caught in a kind of trap. On the one hand, support for Israel is non-negotiable for our elites, not actually mainly because of an Israel lobby. An Israel lobby exists and it's very useful for the establishment, but fundamentally because, as the main ally of the United States, the British establishment right across the board, full spectrum, backs the idea that they need Israel in order to sustain and maintain Western control of the Middle East. It's the key plank. Israel is a key vehicle in the ongoing effort to make sure that the oil and gas in the region stays within the purview, within the control of the Western corporations. And that's the fundamental reason that they are so obstinate in the face of massive opposition. And that's the fundamental reason, actually, why this movement faces such a challenge, why we have to keep coming back and keep building and keep growing, because we are challenging a central plank of the geopolitical project of the most powerful country in the world, the United States. And they have that problem, they have that on the one hand. On the other hand, I think they're aware that they're losing the argument. And one of the great achievements of the movement so far is that we have been able to, I mean, obviously it's a combination of the movement and the actual visceral horror that is produced by the fact of seeing a genocide unfolding in front of your eyes in live, streamed in real time. We have actually got to a situation now where 75% of the population support a permanent ceasefire, where the majority see Israel, not the Palestinians, as the problem, where only 6% of the British population now say they support what the Israelis have done. 6%, that's a tremendous achievement of this movement. The problem we face is that 6% is concentrated at the top of our institutions. It's concentrated, at the top of the managements of the universities, the schools, the education system, the civil service, in Parliament, and so on and so forth. And that's really the battle that we face. And that's kind of context to, I think, understanding how we need to go forward. Now, I just want to say a few words. This is a Stop the War meeting. I guess someone needs to say a few words about some of the events that have taken place in the last few days that have actually changed the whole way in which the world system is likely to operate. Because, I mean, first of all, Trump is clearly a mortal threat to the Palestinians, and his monstrous plan for the people of Gaza, if he should proceed with it, would be absolutely catastrophic. I mean, it's almost incredible to think that we could even be considering an escalation of the horror meted out to the Palestinians already, but that is what we are contemplating here. And at the very minimum, what Trump has done is liable to make the ceasefire more precarious than it already was, and bring it into possibly to the edge of collapse. At the same time, Trump has thrown a grenade into the whole post-Second World War settlement by starting direct peace talks over Ukraine with Putin, and by refusing to underwrite European security. This is about pivoting towards what Trump rightly regards as the US's main enemy, China. It's completely cynical. And in fact, Trump represents a more aggressive, a more protectionist, a more ultra-nationalist and reactionary form of capitalist rule in what is now a more and more multipolar world. And part of the reason why I say this is because this does have direct consequences and will have direct consequences for us, because his message to the Europeans is to say, do what I say, but by the way, you're going to pay for it. And that means that, I mean, what the European powers have been doing of how they've responded has been absolutely pitiful. They're humiliated, they're shocked, but immediately Starmer and most of the other European leaders have basically committed to massively increasing arms spending, and at the same time to imposing austerity in order to pay for this. And that's going to be something that actually I think is going to be a very, very serious part of politics as we move forward from this moment. Of course, Starmer, the kind of ridiculous fantasy foot soldier that he is, has also responded by saying he wants to actually send British troops out to Ukraine in order to police a peace deal that literally weeks ago Starmer was saying shouldn't even happen. So that's a very dangerous situation, and I think one of the most encouraging things I've seen in the last couple of days is the polls that have come out today, which show that the overwhelming majority of British people think that there should be no British troops going to Ukraine. So I want to kind of draw my comments to a close by saying that, on the one hand, all this obviously will empower the far right. It will give confidence to those forces in society that are trying to drag things towards more authoritarian solutions, towards war, to Nigel Farage and so on and so forth. But I think it's very important that we recognise there is nothing inevitable in these circumstances about the success of the warmongers, about the growing power of the authoritarians, or indeed about the rise of the right. Because however nostalgic that maybe some elements in British society are for the dark days of the 1930s. We are not living in 1930s Germany right now. The truth of the matter is, the overwhelming majority of people in this country despise and loathe what Donald Trump stands for, despise and loathe what Nigel Farage stands for, leaving aside Tommy Robinson and his fascist hoodlums. And in these circumstances, we are in a position where we can build serious resistance. In fact, Trump himself, we should remember, is an expression of the challenges to US hegemony, of actually crisis in US imperialism and to economic decline at home. This is what is behind his victim play. This is what is behind his bullying and his aggression. Actually, it is weakness and challenge. And so the truth is, and we have to be clear about this, the right can only make headway in these circumstances if those of us who stand for peace, who stand for justice, who stand for a fairer society are immobilized or are passive. We need to continue to build the Palestine movement on a massive scale. And I mean, I think it's important to recognize that it's a tremendously powerful movement, but it could grow. There is actually a big gap still between the activist base, the numbers of people who come out on the demonstrations, and we reckon at least 3 million people have been on the demonstrations, but there's still a big gap between the people in this room and the many thousands of people in Brighton and in the area who actually support the Palestinians. And we have to recommit ourselves to strengthening and deepening and broadening the movement. That's what is the best way, not just to respond to what our government is doing in terms of supporting the genocide, but this is the way to respond, the most important way to respond to the attacks on the right to protest. There was an article by a former chief of the Metropolitan Police Force called Sir Hugh Orde in The Guardian in December, which said, I don't agree with his analysis in a sense, but what he said was, look, there is two-tier policing. He said, we are tougher with the fascists than we are with the Palestine movement. Now, I don't agree with that, but interesting about his psychology, and the reason he said was because the Palestine movement is so big and mobilises such a social weight that if we were to attack it, there would be rioting and there would be sympathy for the Palestinian, for those people demonstrating for Palestine right across society. And that's the power of a mass movement. That's the force that we have. I agree with direct action. I agree with the whole spectrum of different ways of resisting what this government is doing and supporting the genocide. But the key thing is we need to continue to build the broadest, the most united, the biggest movement we possibly can that brings together the trade unions, the left, the Muslim communities, the Palestinians, other religious and faith communities, 101 different communities across society in support of the Palestinians. That is our power, and that is how we're going to win. And I also do think we have to, as I say, I think we have to campaign over what happened on January the 18th. I think we also have to think seriously, given the serial attacks from Donald Trump, that he's kind of fantasizes about attacking Greenland and taking over Canada and Latin America and God knows, we do need to strengthen actual anti-war organisation in Britain. We need to have a bigger Stop the War coalition in every town and every city. We need to be prepared. We need to not be taken by surprise. Though the man is defined by unpredictability, we have to be ready to move, to produce placards, hands off Greenland, to produce placards to say, don't invade Colombia, whatever it might be. Seriously, we need to be building a wider and a broader Stop the War coalition. And the very final thing I want to say is that this is about Palestine, this is about foreign policy, but it's about something more than that. In a country like Britain, with its toxic traditions of colonialism and imperialism, there really isn't any difference between foreign policy and domestic policy. The two things are completely intertwined. That's why the Stop the War Coalition was set up with the slogans, don't attack Iraq at the time, stop the war, but also no to Islamophobia and no to attacks on our civil liberties, because we understood and continue to understand that what happens abroad has ramifications. It affects our society. This ends up being about the kind of society that we want to live in. It ends up being about the values that we want our society to hold on to, the world that we want our children to live in. And therefore, we need to say as well that this is about saying welfare before warfare, which is something that I think resonates very, very widely. I think we need to put the argument that every penny that is spent on arming Israel or arming Ukraine is a penny that's not spent on the things that people really need. It's a penny that's not spent on our schools, on our hospitals, and on our social care. So building that kind of organisation is a priority and a necessity, but I don't think it will be hard at the moment, because I think the last 16 months have been transformational. They've been traumatic, but I also think they've had a kind of seismic effect on the way many, many people in Britain and around the world think about the society that we live in. To watch the leaders of the most powerful countries on earth brazenly fund genocide, not just stand aside, but fund genocide, has created not just a passing anger, but I think a real break in the way many, many people understand the way the world is going. And we have to remember that we have a huge movement, that there is this deep well of bitterness in wider society against what our governments and our ruling classes are doing. We have to also recognise our movement has made a big difference already, but also some of our recent history. It was actually the anti-war movement, although it didn't stop the war against Iraq, it did win the argument in British society against foreign intervention, and ultimately it did drive Tony Blair out of office if it was too late. And our message to Keir Starmer and the despicable David Lammy is, you sit down with Donald Trump if you want to. You lick Donald Trump's jackboots if you want to. We will oppose him, his allies, and everything he stands for with all our energy until we win. So keep organising, stay in the streets. We can win. Free Palestine.